Fine. So let's resume our discussion. Yeah, good morning. First, I suggest you people to give me some details of what we have discussed in the last class. What did we discuss in the last class? Any quick inputs from your side?
We have discussed about cost.
Yeah, please tell.
Sir, we have discussed about cost volume, how it will be constructed, the usage of the cost value, and then we discussed about the PSM net and the basic building blocks of the convolution neural network.
Okay. So for what application?
For stereo image correlation, sir, for finding the similarity between the stereo.
Yeah, that's fine. So we are finding similarity between the features. So fine. So, but for what computer vision applications did we discuss those things?
3D convolution.
For
3D convolution, sir.
yeah, 3D reconstruction. So if you would like to reconstruct a three-dimensional view or appearance of the object, okay, so then what we need to do is we have the, say, in stereo-based 3D reconstruction methods, we have two images. From them, we try to find out the similarity of each pixel in one image to the other image, because that will give us the disparity, which is inversely proportional to the distance of the object at the scene point. Okay, so that's essentially done through feature in the deep neural networks, and the whole aspect of finding similarity and based on that reconstructing the 3D shape of the object is done in the with the deep features. So that we have discussed in the previous and the architectures based which they perform these tasks. We have discussed in the last class. We also discussed about visual tracking at the end. So now let's get some inputs on what these convolution neural networks are learning. So I will share the slides to discuss them better. But just to give a little bit of overview of what they will be learning at different layers, we will initially discuss with the notes. See, if you have actually an image, okay, assume that you have CNN here. CNN may have a series of layers, right? So you assume that you have actually initial layers. Okay, and then you subsequently have deeper layers. Okay, and then maybe intermediate layers and then deeper layers. And finally, you may be doing fully connected. So you're reshaping to one dimension. And then you are bringing this to the classification task. So let's discuss with respect to the classification task first. Okay, so this is the image. Okay, so these are called shallow layers. Okay, and these are called deeper layers. Okay. So what image lens at the shallow layers, and what does this say in CNN based training? What do we learn at the shallow layers? What do we learn at the deeper layers, and how these can be interpreted, or how these can be these are effective in classification tasks, or these are effective in some other computer vision tasks. That's what we would like to get a basic understanding of it. So what the operation we do at each of the layers is the convolution. So we might have done already some convolution with kernels. So with kernels, and we will be getting convolution maps. So there are two things to understand here. One thing is on the, say, what kernels does they learn? Okay. So second thing is, what is the significance of the feature maps that they are learning? What these kernels learn, because essentially these kernels are the one which are considered to be the model. Okay, so once you train a model or train a convolution neural network, finally you will be having kernels at the first layer, kernels at the second layer, and so on. These kernels are the weight matrices, are the ones which are called as model, and these will be used with any new image to find out perform the classification task. So what do you expect that these kernels learn? So anyway, I will discuss few things, and we also see some details through the slides of Professor Fifi Lee team. But uh, what does this learn? What do you think these learn? These kernels learn? Any quick inputs? Say, assume that there is a 5x5 kernel, or say, just to get the better visualization, we may assume that there is a, say, a little bigger kernel, 7x7 or 11x11 kernel. And we have some, say, 7 kernels or 9 kernels planned like that. Okay. So if we learn such kernels, what do you think these kernels will learn? Say in the initial stages, what do you think they will learn? And subsequently, we will see later. Any guess on this?
So in shallow layers, kernels will learn elementary features like edges, key points.
Right. Okay. Yeah, these essentially learn some features of the image which are important to make a decision. Right. So if we want to say that this is a cat, okay, or a person, or a car, okay, so there are some important features. Those important features may be, say, shape-based features, or maybe some kind of texture-based features, and so on. So essentially, what this kernel, what we are doing with the kernels is the convolution operation. So we are trying to see the similarity of the kernel with respect to the each parts of the image, right? So whenever we have a kernel representing some important information, okay, for that particular image, okay, you can see that, or for a class of images, so you can see that those important things will be highlighted in the feature maps. Okay, so these kernel essentially try to see some of the common features like edges, okay, or maybe some different texture patterns in the image. And these kernels, since they are directly operating, especially the shallow layer, at the shallow layers, directly operating on the image, they more tend to extract, or they more tend to capture the visually understandable features of the image. Okay, so whereas these at the deeper layers, they are not operating on the image, they are operating on features that are extracted so far. So we cannot directly relate the kernels that these extract or kernels these represent. Okay, so since we can understand or visualize image easily and understand the image, we can interpret these kernels to some extent. Shallow layer kernels can be visualized and even visually interpreted to some extent, and we can appreciate them. But at the deeper layers, we can't appreciate because they are not working on the image, they are applied or on the feature maps, subsequent feature maps. However, they do effectively consolidate the information in terms of feature extraction and the from the set of features that they have in the previous layer to perform the classification, because they are guided by this task function and the learning task for classification. Okay, so this is one aspect that we will see. Okay, especially visualizing the kernels at the shallow layer. And we, of course, these slides from Professor Fifi Lee team also visualize the other kernels. We will see them, but we may not be able to interpret much there. So second thing is on the, yeah, please tell. Okay, second thing is on the feature maps. See, we at the deeper layers, when we move more and more towards the final layer, what becomes more prominent or important and significant to take a call on classification or decision making is on the based on the feature maps. Because as you can see at the pre-final layer, we are using the only the features, okay, and then we are trying to give the labels, right? So the land feature maps at the deeper layers will have a very important role in making in decision making, right? And these feature maps usually also represent some of the important aspects that they are learning. So for example, if I take at a deeper layer, some deeper layer, Okay, so all feature, if I see, if this, let it be, say, the dimension of this, let it be 13 cross 13. Okay, and there may be same 128 feature maps like this. Okay, and this 13 cross 13 all may not be very high values. There may be some values which are reasonably high in this. Okay, so those values are corresponds to some important details based on which the decision is taken here, right? And those important values in the feature maps will have a receptive field in the original image, right? And if we observe that, we will be able to get based on what image features are we taking this classification decision, right? Especially if I consider a particular image, for example, to understand easily, let's consider an instance of the image. Okay, and we have given to a length model. And this is the highest value in the feature, one of the feature maps. And in another feature map, the high value may be somewhere else. Okay, but in one feature map, we have taken this the high value. And corresponding to this, there is a receptive field. Okay, because this is at the deeper layer, the receptive field also will be bigger. Okay, so assume that this is the receptive field corresponding to this. Okay, and now if we see this, see if this is the cat, possibly the cat might be located in this region. If we are giving a correct label of cat here, okay, it means that we are capturing the proper region in the image, and the features in that proper region are very well captured or highlighted, and based on that the decision is given. Okay, so feature map, essentially, if you understand, if you use the feature maps, okay, the high values of in the feature map, if once we identify, that's usually feature maps comes after activation function. Okay, so these are also can be considered as activations at that layer. So the high values in feature map, okay, will help us to infer based on which image region are we giving a decision. Okay, so receptive fields corresponding to the high values in the feature maps indicate based on which the decision is taken. Okay, is this clear? Signify the classification, how we are doing. Okay, so these are few easy things that we can infer from a learned convolution neural network. Okay, so let's see now some of the visual aspects of this. Of course, we can do few more things or many more things, in fact, with this kind of understanding. So there are different, there is a like research direction itself on understanding convolution neural networks more and more better. And in fact, once we understand the convolution networks, some can do reasonably good magics with the convolution networks, or the way they learn. Once we understand, we can control, and then we can create and synthesize, okay, better and like new scenarios with the convolution neural networks learning. Okay, so those we will discuss probably very little now, but we will discuss the basic elements that helps us to understand convolution neural networks. Okay, so now one thing that we can, just to get the idea, if we see all the training samples, and if we see that a given region, at a given region, okay, if the activation is reasonably high for a certain class of images, and if we keep observing what this region is capturing, okay, then what you can see is it captures almost similar patches in the original image. Or if we understand, say if it captures eye, for example, okay, it may be, if this is capturing eye region in the image, this roughly may be capturing the like the high values in the activation function in that feature map essentially will be capturing the eyes all the time. So if you consider a particular feature map, in that feature map, sometimes like the highest value can be here, sometimes highest value can be here, sometimes here. But this feature map, if you observe if you take the patches corresponding to the high values in that feature map, they will all be looking similar. Okay, so essentially the feature maps capture a particular feature map captures a particular kind of texture or particular kind of features, image features when it lands appropriately. So let's see few of these things in slides. So here are some of the visual descriptions from the slides on understanding the convolutional networks. I have taken the help of slides from Professor Fifi Lee team to discuss this better. So the essentially what we are discussing is what does the features land or what does the kernels at each of the layers represent. So as you can see here, this is the these are the kernels plotted at the shallow layer or the first layer, in fact. Okay, as you can, this is in LXNet. So the dimension of kernels is kernels are the weight matrices is 11 cross 11, and you have from 3 cross 3 original image to 64 maps in the next layer. So the dimension of kernels are 11 cross 11 into 3 into 64. Okay, so if you see them, so each of the 11 cross 11, if you plot or show them as a matrix or an image, then as you can see here, they're extracting essentially different texture information from the image or a kind of different edge information from the image. Okay, some are extracting some blob kind of informations, some are extracting textures kind of information, and so on. Okay, so this similar visualization can be done on different other networks. So this is on ResNets and DenseNets. So as you can see here, even in the 7 cross 7 maps, they're extracting the similar features. So at the shallow layers, as we discussed, we can reasonably understand the what the kernels and what they are learning. Because kernels, as you know, will be used for convolution at each of the image regions, and hence they make sense in terms of extracting some features. So if you understand the kernel, also since you are finding out the highest correlation in the convolution output, as the proper learning which is encouraged through the backpropagation. So if the activation function is high, we take it to the next level, right? So that will help us to use the or to encourage the kernels to learn the features that are that are more repetitive in the original image, or with which we can take the decision in the classification or in the computer vision task that we are interested. Hope this is clear. So here is the visualization of the kernels at different layers. Since these are very small, we can't understand, but even bigger visualizations doesn't not easy to interpret or doesn't make much sense directly. However, they could notice that actually, so if we extract the a particular, if we are interested to extract a particular feature in an image, so at a given feature map or at a given layer, so essentially they tend to extract a similar kind of features. So here is the visualization on the feature maps now. So previously what we have visualized are the kernels. Here what we are visualizing are the feature maps. Okay, so feature maps comes after activation, as you know, and here are 13 cross 13 feature maps at some layer. And as you can see, in different feature maps, the high values of activation are at different regions, and the high value of activations will represent some patch in the original image, which is of significant. Okay, so in making the decision. So that is can be seen. So as this is their experiment to understand that better. So they have taken different images, and then at a given feature map, now at a given constant layer and at a given feature map, they're trying to find out the maxima, like patches corresponding to maximum values in the activations. And those patches look like this. For a given, at a given, say, feature map, this looks like this. At another given feature map, this looks like this, and so on. Okay, so essentially what it's happening is they're extracting different, each of the kernel is trying to get different image information, okay, at the high level of feature maps. So as you can see here, these are more of focus or corner kind of things, okay, like eyes, nose, and so on. Here more of edges kind of thing, and here more of text kind of thing, and so on. So these are from the image, cropped from the image, essentially the receptive field of the maximas in a particular feature map. And one like the other important aspect of convolutional neural networks is the features finally land that are at the final layer, pre-final layer. So those pre-final layer features are referred to as logits, and they are also important. So we have discussed two important aspects of what convolutional neural networks learn. One is the kernels and interpreting the kernels. Second is the feature maps and understanding from the feature maps what are they learning. And third one is the final feature, pre-final layer features that are learned, based on which the final decision is taken. Okay, so these are referred to as logits, and these also form as very important aspect of like learning or understanding the convolutional neural networks. In fact, by some changes, appropriate changes in the logits, one can effectively change what the convolutional neural network learns as well. If we change the logits appropriately during training, that will affect in the testing or subsequent performing at subsequent times as well. That means the learning of convolutional neural networks can also be affected by understanding and changing the way the logits will be. Okay, so the basic advantage of using understanding or interpreting these logits is, so you can directly take them and use it. Say the pre-final layer features can be used as a feature vectors that are used for any classification task. See, in conventional methods, when we were using computer vision and say classifiers like neural network, support vector machine, and so on, what we used to do is we take the original image and extract some handcrafted features. Handcrafted features means, say, what is the say if it is the flower, how many petals are there, what is the dimension of the flower, okay, and what is the color, and so on. So these are handcrafted. For elephant, the like size, length of the legs, okay, the and few other things. So the texture, color, and other things. So similarly, for each of the object, we'll be extracting different handcrafted features. These handcrafted features can be like purely image based, or maybe like histogram of orientation gradients based features, which captures the shape, and local binary patterns kind of features, which captures the texture variations in the image, and so on. Okay, so and once we get the feature vector, then we used to give these feature vectors to the classification networks like support vector machine, neural network, in one-dimensional feature vectors, what we have extracted either through handcrafted methods or through some kind of, even though handcrafted, but elegant methods like standard methods. So, and give these one-dimensional feature vectors for making a decision to a classifier, or based on the feature vector distance, we take the call on which class does it belongs to. That means if I have feature vector for each of them, and if I have a test, say for each different class, if I have 10 classes, for each 10 classes, I have the representative samples and their feature vectors. Okay, and then I have a test sample and its feature vector. I find out the distance of this feature vector with each of the representative samples from each class. To which class it is most closer to that, I say that I assign to that class. Okay. Or if I from a database, if I want to pick a similar object of a given object, okay, then what I will do, I take a feature vector, I take the, for the feature vector for the whole data set, I will pick the nearest neighbors of this feature and say that these are all similar. Okay, so that is referred to as image retrieval or unlike searching for the same image. So that also we can do with the feature vectors. So either classification, searching, or many computer vision tasks are done through feature vectors. We can do the same even with convolutional networks. So now where are the feature vectors that are learned through the whole convolution operations and so on? Okay, at the pre-final layer. These feature vector essentially will help us as a encoding of the object. Okay, or embedding of the object also. Okay, so and this will help us to find out the similarity of these several different objects and can make the class decision on class label and so on. Okay, so this is like exactly the feature vector we were doing through handcrafted features, but these are deep features people call, because we are extracting through deep convolution neural networks. Okay, or many layers. Also, using that feature vector, still again you can do the retrieve the images or find out the similar objects or class labels and so on. I hope this is clear. And further, what people do is to understand what this CNN is finally learning over the whole data samples. So far, we have seen for a given image, okay, or for some set of images, in the images, what the features they are learning. And from the learned features, how do we classify or perform or understand the objects like similarity or classification. Now what we can do through, if we see these feature vectors to a smaller dimension, if we take these feature vectors to smaller dimension through principal component analysis or through some little more complex embeddings like TSNE embedding. So what these do is they will project these feature vectors to a very small dimension. Okay, so you can project this, say for example, you know, principal component analysis, right? So you find out the first two principal components of this all feet, say you take all data samples, okay, and then their feature vectors. You have actually X feature vectors of say 1000 samples. Using these 1000 sample feature vectors, you can construct a covariance matrix, okay, and then find out the eigenvalues and eigenvectors of the covariance matrix, and then find out the dominant eigenvalues and corresponding eigenvectors. Okay, so project all the samples using these two eigenvectors to get a two-dimensional representation of each of the samples, right? Once you get two-dimensional representation of each of the samples, then what you can see is something like this. So all class 1 samples will come closer, class 2 samples may come closer, class 3 may be closer, class 4 may be closer, and so on. So you can see that the samples can be easily separated or represented if the classification is very good. Okay, and if the feature vectors are not very good for separating the samples, then you may see that there is a overlap, there will be overlap in the samples of different classes in this two-dimensional representation as well. So this is very good for representing the samples in after learn, like and interpreting what the convolutional neural networks are learning, and also to visualize whether the classification is going fine or not. That means how effectively the clustering or classification is happening for the samples in the training data set as well as for the test data set. Okay, so if you bring the samples all in some order, so if you see them in higher dimension, like if you see them in patches, most of the samples of same class will come together. Okay, so this is slightly different kind of representation, but somewhat similar to the earlier one, putting the samples in place of the points. Okay, hope the details so far I have discussed are clear. Okay, if you have any questions, you can ask. A few more things on understanding the CNNs and then what they are doing, we will discuss, and then we will move on to the next topic. Okay, so here what we are trying to see is, we want to understand the significance of each of the region in the image, okay, in making a class decision. For example, if I am classifying this is a trained neural network, okay, a convolutional neural network. We want to infer how from the learned network, how much importance this region has in making the decision of this class sample as to that class. Okay, so probability of elephant is what we want to see here. And probability of elephant, assume that without occlusion is 0.96 or something. Okay, or 0.95 itself. Okay, then if I start occluding different regions, occlusion means hiding. Okay, different regions, then the probability of detecting the elephant will decrease or will change. See, for example, if I occlude this region as this is a uniform region and has no information of elephant, okay, it may have the same like probability of detecting the elephant or slightly lesser. Okay, if I occlude this region, which is very important, then there will be good drop in the probability of elephant. Okay, if I give this image as input to the convolutional network. Okay, right? So in this way, if I keep changing at different locations, these occluded patches, what I notice will be the change or the effect of the that region in classification. Okay, so the drop here will indicate the importance of that region in classification. For example, see if we actual probability of without any occlusion is 0.96. Okay, now if I occlude this region, the importance of this region I can consider as 0.96 minus 0.95, which is 0.01. The importance of this region I can consider as 0.96 minus 0.75, which is 0.21. Okay, so like that I can characterize the probability of importance of different regions by sliding this occlusion patch, and that can be shown as a heat map as well. Heat map in the sense that heat map is the one which will indicate, say, the importance of that region. Okay, so or this can also be, say, in some sense it can also be related to attention map. Which region is more important in making the decision for that particular sample into that particular class, right? So you take a particular sample and then do that, then you will be able to see that the change will be very higher if you hide this region in probability to that class, in classifying to that class, and hence this is more important region, or this is more important to take that decision. Okay, so this is the heat map of this image for this network. Okay, so hope this is clear. So far, if you have any questions, you can ask. This is the basic discussion on understanding the convolutional networks. Okay, so there are, as I mentioned, there are many other things that help us to understand better on what the convolutional networks are doing, and we can do many things with better understanding as well. So if you have any questions, please ask. Otherwise, I will move on to the discussion on the next topic. Okay, any questions from the students? Okay, fine. So let's move on to the discussion on next topic. So I will discuss now on generative adversarial networks. But before I discuss on the generative adversarial networks, let me discuss a little more on the like some basic introduction to generative adversarial networks. That's on the autoencoders. Okay, so I will discuss effectively on autoencoders and GANs. See, so far in the convolutional networks, we have seen that we have seen classification task. Okay, we also have seen a segmentation task, and then different other computer vision methods, detection. Okay, 3D reconstruction, and so on. Okay, tracking and so on. See, these are essentially mainly computer vision applications of convolutional networks. there is one more very important class of requirement or application of convolutional neural network. That's actually, see, for example, if we are given some set of images. Okay, so assume that you are given some set of images. Okay, so these are all, say, person images. Okay, or you may be given some set of images which are cats or cars. The question now is, can I understand what's the underlying sample space from which these images have come, or underlying distribution from which these images has come. Assume that these images, each of the images is one realization, okay, from a probability distribution of high dimensional probability distribution, okay, or from a higher dimensional vector. Okay, so assume that there is a high dimensional space from which we are sampling a particular vectors. That means from the 3-dimensional space, we can sample 3-dimensional vectors. Okay, similarly from the higher dimensional space, let this be say 20 cross 20. Then from 400 dimensional space, we are sampling some points. Okay, so each of the point is a vector in 400 cross 1 dimension. And that 400 cross 1 vector may be visualized as an image here. Okay, so that's that image. Now, if we sample in a particular way or in a given space, okay, we will be getting the persons. Assume that. Okay, in a particular space, we may be getting the cats. Okay, in a particular, through a particular distribution, we will be getting the cats. Okay, and so on. So now the question is, can we capture the distribution itself? Okay, so just to put these things in little more easy details or simpler details. See, if we have actually, if I start telling some random numbers. Okay, so if I start telling 0.2, 0.1, okay, 0.05, 0.3, say 1.5, and so on, 0.02. See, what can you tell if I keep telling some numbers like this? I may tell hundreds of numbers like this. Assume that all numbers has the lower value. Okay, minimum value is 0. And then the maximum value is say 0.3. Okay. And what can you tell about these random numbers? Can any guess can you make? Very vague guess about these random numbers? Yeah, quick answer for this. Can you make any quick guess for this random numbers, or from if I ask you to describe these random numbers, is there any way you can describe them? Yeah, quick answer.
It's a uniform distribution.
Yeah, so these might have come from uniform distribution. Okay, the possibility is, one possibility is, if I consider these each is x, okay, then these random numbers might have come from uniform distribution with 0 to 0.3, having uniform in range 0 to 0.3. Say for some other, like if I keep giving random numbers, in case if these set of random numbers has high values, okay, close to say 0.2, for example. I have all the values, but close to 0.2, there are more in this random numbers that I have thrown. Okay, then can you comment little more? In case if I observe these random numbers, these are only in the range, mostly still here in the range 0 to 0.3 only, but still I see that they're not equally distributed. That means like in each of the ranges, they don't occur with equal probability frequency. Okay, so in that case, these may also come from, these might also have come from what?
Might be a Gaussian distribution.
Yeah, might be from Gaussian distribution with
mean 0.2.
mean point and some variance. Okay, just to be actually, since they are all from 0 to 0.3, we like the standard deviation will not be greater than say for example will not be greater than something say 0.1. So 0.05 say for example 0.05. So it's small standard deviation, that's why they are around. Okay, otherwise they might have spread from -10 to +10 as well. Okay, so something like that. So I can comment on the mean and variance, and I can essentially comment, try to get the distribution. See, but the thing is, how these are all my guesses. I want to know more clearly from which distribution these have come. Okay, these have originated from. What is the parent distribution? What should I do? Huh? Why I am interested in parent distribution, you tell me. Fine, it's okay. You are given some random numbers. I can do with these random numbers. Fine, I can say that these random numbers, if I want to perform, each of these random numbers correspond to one image, for example. Assume that. Okay, so now this is a say image 1. And then image 2 and so on. I have actually 100 images or 1000 images. Then what I do, say few images may these belongs to actually 10 classes. C1 to say C10. Okay, then I may wish to classify. This is one problem I may have. And like that I may have different problems. Here I have given numbers only, but there can be random vectors. Okay, if I have random vector of 400 cross 1, then it can become an image itself. Is it not? And that can be classified to one of the class. That may be interest maybe to classify to one of the class, right? I hope you see the analogy between the random numbers and the images that we are dealing with. Okay, so now why do you think I'm interested in understanding the parent distribution of these random numbers? My job may be to classify, segment, detect, and so on. Why do you think I may be interested in understanding the parent distribution of these random numbers? Any quick answer? If I assume that, if I get the parent distribution of these random numbers, what advantage do you think I will have? Assume that I say that I have captured somehow and said that this is the parent distribution, not this. Okay, and what advantage do you have?
If we find a new data sample, we can compare that with these distributions and see which class it belongs to.
Right. So one thing is, see for each class, then what I can do, say for example, out of this 1,000 samples, say I may pick up actually say for each class to understand what is its parent distribution. Okay, and then say that if the new sample comes closer to this parent distribution, means it is this class, otherwise other class. I can perform some classification like this. Okay, so that means each of these distributions, say these samples are like this. Okay, this is one class. Okay, and this is another class distribution. Okay, and this is third class distribution. Okay, so then what I may do, based on this, I will be easily able to classify the test sample into one of the categories, right? So that's one advantage. Okay, so and are there any other advantages on understanding the parent distribution? Huh? Are there any other advantages? Say I assume that the class 1 distribution is RP of okay x given omega 1. If we write in RP of omega 1 given x, okay, in our posterior probability based notations. Okay, what we are essentially trying to say is I am trying to get the P of omega 1 given x for this class distribution, capturing this class distribution, or essentially I am capturing P of x itself. Okay, the whole sample distribution. P of x means whole sample distribution. Okay, this is for all samples, right? And P of x given omega 1 is what? Only that particular class sample. X given omega 1 is what? Distribution of omega 1 class. Okay, so if what is the importance do you have if I capture P of x, the whole sample distribution, or P of x given omega 1? that particular sample class distribution. What more advantages do you think I will have? This will help me, but certainly for better classification. That's one thing. Okay, but are there any other advantages? See, I will give you 1,000 random numbers. Okay, now my question is, you generate another 100 random numbers. Do you think you will be able to do it? Okay, otherwise I may give you 10,000 random numbers and I will ask you to generate 100 more random numbers. Do you think is it easy to do it, or how do you do it? Or I may give 1 lakh random numbers and ask you to generate 100 more random numbers, or one more random number, just one more. Any clues on that? You understood or not? The importance of what I am discussing now. Yes or no? Any quick answer? Okay, Prabhat, you understand?
Sorry, sir. My volume got cut.
Okay. So Deepanshu, did you understand?
Sir, could you repeat once?
Yeah. So you should ask before I ask you. Okay. So fine. So actually assume that you have 100 random numbers I give you, and I ask you to generate 100 more random numbers. Do you think you will be able to do it?
If
1
we
lakh random numbers.
get the distribution, if we are able to understand this distribution, like you said before, we can sample from the distribution.
Right. If you can do it, only provided if you understand or capture the parent distribution. Okay, if you don't understand from which distribution these random numbers have come from, whether I give you 10,000 or 10 lakhs or as many random numbers, you can't generate even single more new random number. Okay, so to understand or synthesize better and better data, what is very essential is to capture the parent distribution. Okay, so especially synthesizing data mainly needs parent distribution, but not only the synthesizing data. Many other things also will take the advantage or help from understanding the parent distribution. Okay, so now what essentially understanding this helps is in synthesizing better data. So how much data can you synthesize if you understand the distribution? Assume that I have captured the parent distribution. So how much data? 100 samples only you can generate? Or you can generate 1,000 samples? How many samples do you think you can generate? Any answer to that? Assume that I have captured somehow the parent distribution. Say I have given 100 random numbers. From that, I have captured what is the distribution from which these 100 random numbers have come from. Once I capture it, how many samples do you think I can generate?
Yeah. Once we know the distribution, we can generate any number of samples.
Any number of samples you can generate. We can generate infinite number of samples. So that's where the greatness or the credit of these generative adversarial networks are. Okay, so they're all called generative methods, generative models or generative methods. The main aim here is not just inferring, okay, like making a discriminative decision or discriminative kind of assessment from the information that we have, but we want to make a generative assessment in the sense that we capture the base and from that we tackle the problem. Okay, so without going to the base also we can tackle the problem. Okay, that means if we are asked to classify, you can easily classify probably without even looking at the distribution of samples. Just find the nearest neighbor with the features you will be able to put into one of the class. Okay, but why are we capturing in Bayesian classification the underlying class conditional densities? The reason being, they will help us to capture the base or the distribution from which these samples have come from. And that will give us the whole characteristic of the different classes and helps us to get a unified like assessment or the holistic assessment for the classification. Okay, same thing is effectively done through these generative models. And so far with this convolution neural networks, whatever we have done is not in the generative nature, because we are nowhere capturing the distribution of the samples. We are only essentially using the samples to discriminate between the classes or to use those encodings or the features to perform any subsequent tasks. Okay. So these generative models now, say for example, if we apply on this person data sets, or the, for example, if we, as I mentioned, these are all 400 class 1 vectors. Okay, on this 400 class 1 vectors in 400 dimensional space. Okay, assume that I know where the distribution of this, how the distribution of these persons is. Assume that, just to have an easy example, these persons samples. Okay, so these person samples also come from a normal distribution of a mean vector and a variance covariance matrix. Okay, so this covariance can also be identity covariance or some covariance. Both mean vector is actually 400 cross 1 and covariance matrix is what dimension? Covariance matrix will be 400 cross 400. Okay, from this we sample. Now say from somehow we captured the, for all this person data set, or the parent distribution from which these persons have come from. Okay, so now if I keep sampling from this distribution, what do you think will happen? What do you think will happen? Any answer? Quick answer. You understood or not, Prasad?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, what will happen if I sample from this distribution that I have captured now for the persons?
So we can generate the data.
Yeah, we can generate what data?
The person data. We can replicate the person.
Yeah, we can have new persons now. Okay, with new styles and so on. If we more focus on styles, we will get styles. New persons we will get. Okay, faces, if we take, new faces will come. Okay, and its new cats will come and so on. So this is in fact a very remarkable like breakthrough in using the convolution neural networks. So far we are only using for analysis or performing some kind of discriminative task. This now gives in terms of generative or synthesis based task as well. And using these tasks, you can also make the discriminative based tasks even more effective. Okay, so this is effectively done in generative adversarial networks. So is the idea clear, or any questions you want to ask before I conclude?
Sir, excuse me, sir.
Yeah, please ask.
In generative adversarial networks, whether we can only synthesize the data or even we can classify the data, sir?
Yeah, we can do both. We can do better classification as well. We will see how we can use it for better classification. But the which is not there in the other conventional convolution neural networks and which is there here. If we ask, it's the synthesis of the data or capturing the parent distribution of the data.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sir,
Yeah, any other questions? Yeah.
yes, sir. So here, if I understand correctly, we are having a distribution for every pixel, right? So this particular,
Yeah.
yeah. So say if we want pixels that are dependent on one another, is that actually possible for a distribution to actually take into account probability distributions of neighboring pixels?
What you're saying?
So I'm asking if pixels distribution is independent or not.
Okay, see, pixel distribution may or may not be independent. See, you can enforce some kind of rules in generating the new data, that once you capture the data, you need not generate in the same manner. You can alter and generate in the way that you wish to generate. Okay, that capability also we can have. For example, if I initially my covariance matrix is not like diagonal, then the features are independent. Okay, that usually happens in natural scenarios. But if you would like to make independent and generate and see what kind of new data or better data you get, you can do that. In fact, some of the methods try to do that kind of things as well. But what we are capturing is not individually pixel means and pixel variances. Okay, as we in a higher dimensional space, you can't particularly see a point is represented by all dimensions. Okay, so we are essentially finding out the distribution of the whole vector, okay, or the random vector representing the random sample, random sample at hand, right? So each now random sample or the sample at hand is a random vector, and its distribution is what we are trying to capture.
Sir, but the random vector itself, isn't it the image itself?
Yeah, it's image.
Okay.
Random sample is the image is equal to random vector now. Okay, in higher dimensional space, d cross 1 image. So d cross say d by whatever root d cross root d if we consider. Okay, this is equal to d cross 1 and this is rd. So this is the random vector, and distribution of it is what we are capturing.
Yes, sir. So if our input image has, for example, a cat in the bottom right corner, our synthesized image also should have a cat in the bottom right corner, right?
No, not necessary. Oh, if all input images will have actually cat in the random, like in the bottom corners, okay, then you may have.
Yes, sir.
Image as well. But some image will have here, some image will have here, and so on. Okay, then you may have a mix, right? So you're essentially capturing more on the, it's a mix. Again, you generated images also will be mixed. Sometimes because generated images, when you say, even if it is Gaussian random density or Gaussian density or a uniform density, all the time I need not generate only 0.3, 0.3 or 0.2, 0.2, right? So sometimes 0.1, 0.01, so different things will come. Even in Gaussian, I may be sampling. So when I sample in a new case, I may sample here, I may sample here, I may sample here. Okay, so sometimes it comes at the bottom, sometimes at the half. If many of the objects will have only at the bottom, then most of the times you also generate at the cat at the bottom. But sometimes if some of the objects have in the other regions as well, it may come at different regions with less frequency. In general.
Yes, sir. But here we are doing pixel-based sampling, so there also we might also get images where half of the cat is in the bottom right, half of the cat is in the bottom left, or something like that.
See, pixel-based sampling we are not doing, right? So image-based like sample itself is a whole all pixels.
Yes, sir. Like, but still, we are actually, aren't we looking at the? Aren't we choosing pixels independently as well?
No, we will not look pixels independently. We are looking the whole vector, right? So there will be, say, what we are capturing is the whole interrelation and then the space where these samples are originating from. So the whole, like the distribution of these samples put together. Maybe if there are some cats half here, we can also have cats half here also. Not necessarily that whole cat has to come. Most of the times we assume that the cat is at the middle. Okay, so for in at least in the initial evolutions.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Okay then. Thanks to all. We will meet again on Friday. Thank you.